Hello everybody, I am Sayle and I'm bringing you a recap of groups E and F from the Teamliquid Legacy Starleague round of 24, which happened just last weekend. In Group E, we had Eonzerg, Pyke, DeWalt, and Vadi. In the first match, we had Eonzerg versus Pyke in a ZVZ on ground 0. Both players went for mirror builds in the beginning, going 9 pool versus 9 pool. However, Eonzerg decided to cancel his Zergling speed while Pyke didn't, which gave Eonzerg the slight edge that he was able to use to kill an additional Overlord, which eventually snowballed into a win for Eonzerg. In the second match, we had DeWalt versus Vadi. Both players opened fairly standardly with a Forge Fast Expand versus a 3-base Zerg. DeWalt then decided to go for a 2-gate speed lot into 2 Stargate mid-game, and then he went for a big Suicide Zealot attack against the Zerg's natural, killing off all of the Sunkens there. He then followed this up with his Corsairs, killing all the Overlords there at the natural, and with a couple of DTs there, Vadi was forced to GG out. In the winner's match, we had DeWalt versus Eonzerg. The openings were very standard Forge Fast Expand for DeWalt, versus 3 hatches at 3 bases for Eonzerg, although he did decide to take his close third, which in their spawn locations meant that he was expanding towards the Perdos. Didn't seem to matter too much though, as DeWalt went for a fairly standard mid-game, going for +1 Corsairs off just a single Stargate, while Eonzerg transitioned into a fairly standard 5-hatch Hydralisk play. DeWalt then decided, however, to take a very fast hidden third base at the 12 o'clock location on the other side of the map. This, however, resulted in him getting contained by a Hydra Lurker army, as obviously he'd sacrificed some of his mid-game army strength to get that hidden expansion up. He responded to this contain by going for some crazy storm drops against Eonzerg's third and natural, and actually getting quite lucky, with Eonzerg seeming to just forget about the shuttle even though he should have known about it. And this resulted in a lot of drone kills against Eonzerg that he perhaps could have avoided. Another boon for DeWalt was that Eonzerg managed to somehow scout every single base on the map except for DeWalt's hidden third, which meant that for a very long time it was 3 base against 3 base, and the Zerg's fourth was quite a bit delayed compared to the Perdos third. DeWalt also had made a couple of gateways at this hidden third base, from which he made Zealots that were able to actually snipe Eonzerg's fourth base. And while he was doing this, he even decided to go for another hidden base at the top right corner of the map, giving him 2 hidden bases and 4 bases in total against Eonzerg's 3. Using this production advantage, DeWalt was actually able to break part of the contain that gave him access to the narrow ramp leading up to his close third. He then took this base as well, giving him 5 bases against Eonzerg's 3. And eventually had just so much production that the contain didn't even matter, and he was able to take the game, making DeWalt the first player out of the group, going 2-0. In the losers match, we had Pyke versus Vadi playing a ZVP, as Vadi is of course a race picker. Pyke decided to go for a 9-pool speed strategy, being very aggressive against his Protoss opponent, while Vadi on the other hand went for a 1-base strategy, going for a 1 Stargate into expansion, with of course some photon cannons to defend it. Slightly unusual, but when Pyke decided to go for a big Ling attack against the Expo, the cannons did get up just in time to defend it, and thwarted the attack fairly handily. Pyke followed this up with a Hydra bust, but of course Vadi was very well prepared, having scouted it with his Corsair, and built plenty of cannons, and Pyke was forced to GG out. In the final match, we had Vadi versus Eonzerg for another PvZ. Eonzerg decided to go for an overpull strategy, and Vadi opted to go once again for his 1-base Stargate into expansion build, which I thought was a rather curious and questionable build, but it seemed to work for him against Pyke. Eonzerg, interestingly, decided to try the same thing as Pyke and went for a big Ling attack against the expansion just as the cannons were going up, which didn't work out very well for him either. Interestingly, he actually went for a second attack attempt against the expansion, but due to some weird AI bugging from the Zerglings, once again failed miserably. He then followed this up with some Mutalisks, but of course Vadi, having opened with Stargate, already had plenty of Corsairs to deal with it, making them fairly ineffective. In order to catch up in the game, Eonzerg decided to get a very quick 4th base against Vadi's 2 to try and out-macro his opponent. Meanwhile, as soon as he scouted that the Protoss was going for his own third, he went for a big Hydra attack at the Protoss' natural, but unfortunately for him, there were 6 High Templars full of energy just waiting for him, and his entire Hydra army got massacred. Using this big army advantage, Vadi moved out to take a 4th base while simultaneously attacking the Zerg's 4th to try and even out the bases. Aeon Zerg barely held onto his 4th base using a sick Lurker Egg block on the narrow ramp, holding off a much bigger Protoss army just with good positioning. During this time, there was also a big engagement in the middle of the map between the armies that actually resulted in Vadi suiciding his entire Corsair fleet while not paying attention and looking instead at his ground forces. Even though this attack didn't actually go very well for Aeon Zerg, he was able to follow this up with a second battle that went much better as he got a big surround on the Protoss army and reduced it to just a single Reaver and Dragoon. After the deciding engagement, Aeon Zerg then sent his huge army to go and attack the Protoss' 4th and 5th bases. Vadi sent small groups of units to try and defend these, but eventually was not able to and sacrificed a lot of units while failing to defend these bases. In the end, Aeon Zerg ended up with a huge army compared to the Protoss' very weak 1 or 2 control groups of units, and the Protoss was reduced back down to his original 3 bases. Vadi moved out to try and retake a 4th while denying the Zerg's 5th, but with so few units, he wasn't able to stand up to the masses of Hydralisks and was forced to GG out, giving us Aeon Zerg and DeWalt advancing from Group E. In Group F, we had Julia, Cozy, Rams, and Terror. In the first match between Julia and Cozy, Julia opted for a somewhat peculiar 9 drone scout into 12 pool, whereas Cozy went for a very standard 12 hatch. Curiously, Cozy somehow accidentally made a creep colony in his base, even commenting on it in the game. Julia, on the other hand, just followed up with an in-base hatchery, giving him 2 hatches in his main base compared to Cozy's expansion hatchery at his natural. Cozy then decided to go for mass lings, but of course because Julia was just on 1 base, his lings weren't really able to bust up the ramp and do any damage. And the result was that instead of being able to get mass Mutalisks when his Spire finished, he was forced to get just a single Mutalisk and a lot of Scourge to try and hold off Julia's own Mutalisks. Julia proved to have good Muta Micro and was able to micro down all of Cozy's Scourge, giving him the win in this first match. In the second match, we had Rams vs Terror in one of the few PvTs of the TLS. Rams opened with an aggressive 2-gate goon strategy against the FD opening of Terror. Terror was able to hold this off quite easily with his Spider Mines, and the result of the opening was that Rams' observers were very much delayed. This meant that he wasn't able to see Terror's push off 2 bases until it was too late, allowing Terror to get a very tight contain on the Protoss natural. Terror used this good position at the natural to tighten the noose on the Protoss, and eventually got Rams to GG after a sick mind drag into his workers. In the winners match, we had a TVZ between Terror and Julia. Julia opened for an overpull into a fairly standard 3-hatch build, but Terror decided to go for a 1-fact expand into a fake mech strategy. What he did was he made a few Goliaths which he showed to Julia, thus forcing the Zerg player into an anti-mech composition which was primarily Hydralisks and Mutalisks. However, at this point Terror had already switched into pure bio, which meant that the Hydralisk composition of the Zerg wasn't effective at all. This army allowed Terror to kill the Zerg's 3rd base, while some late lurkers allowed Julia to barely defend his own natural. Unfortunately, this meant that he wasn't able to get any 3rd bases as Terror's highly mobile bio army moved around the map, killing off all of his 3rd base attempts. Julia then opted to go for a Hydra lurker composition in the mid-game, just going for a big mid-game army rather than rushing for Hive, as is the norm in ZBT. He actually managed to do a huge attack against Terror's 3rd base and deny this base for a very long time, which made this game become much closer with a 2-base Terran against the 3-base Zerg. Unfortunately for him, Terror's army was already too strong at this point, and Terror was able to take the game, advancing 2-0 from the group. In the losers match, we had Rams vs Cozy in another TVZ. This one had a much more standard opening, with 1 Rex expand from Rams against just a 3-hatch opening from Cozy. However, Cozy decided to go for a huge Ling attack right before getting his Spire, and unfortunately for him, Rams' SimCity was very good and he had a good reaction time with his SEV pull, meaning the attack failed horribly. Cozy then decided to go for a crazy Zerg strategy, skipping lurkers entirely and just using his Mutaling army to hold the Terran off while rushing straight for Ultralisks. Unfortunately for him, Rams' army was just a little bit too strong and he was able to kill Cozy's 3rd base as well as his army, despite Cozy getting a pretty good surround with his Mutaling. With Cozy stuck on 2 bases, the Ultralisks were not enough, and he was forced to GG out. In the final match, we had Rams vs Julia for yet another TVZ. Julia opted to go for a curious overpull into a gas steal against Rams, who was just going for a 1-Rax expand. He then did some pressure with his initial Zerglings, and followed up with a quick 2-hatch Muta play. Unfortunately for him, his Mutalisks were not able to do very much damage to the Terran. Julia then opted to take the close third base to him, which even though was closer to the Terran's base as well, he was able to defend using very good Lurker Defiler play, holding off a Terran army that was double his own in supply with good Dark Swarms. He also counterattacked at the Terran's third base and was able to deny Rams' third for a tremendously long time. Unfortunately for him, his attempt at a 4th base was also thwarted by Rams, who had a huge army out on the map. Rams then did a very cool bust on his natural after faking an attack towards the Zerg's third, and was able to kill off Julia's natural, which also had his hive. Julia did a desperate counterattack at Rams' third, but was not successful and had to GG out. So with that, Rams and Terror will advance from the group to move on to the round of 16. And don't forget to tune in this Saturday, March 2nd at 9 CET for the first day of the round of 16 casts. I'm going to be bringing you guys groups A and B, where we have our first glimpse at what our invite players are capable of. We will have Zeke and Michael playing in groups A and B respectively, so it's going to be super duper exciting. Hope to see you guys there. Take 1, and action. Blah, blah. Go re. Blah. Ah. Wow, what the ah! Go again, go again. Eon Zerg sent his what the is that last sentence? Oh, yeah. GG, yo. Man, that was hard. Ugh. Good luck editing this.